So some of you might know I create podcasts for a living, and I'm well aware of the fact that I've probably confused half the room just by saying that word. So podcasts are basically just talk radio shows but on demand. You can find podcasts on just about any subject out there. You subscribe to them on your smartphone and they come to you anytime. You can listen to them whenever you like. Now, before I became a podcast producer, I was a really avid podcast listener. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, because I really believe that the podcast content I've consumed over the last 10 years has made massive changes in what I do in my life as well. And that's not just in work, that's in, I think I'm happier, I think I'm healthier, I think I've built a better business because of everything that I've learned through podcasts. So tonight I just want to talk to you a little bit about how that's all happened and why you should be listening to great audio programs as well. So my story starts in 2006 when I came out of uni and I was trying to start a web design business. I got a web design magazine and I found on it a cover disc, when those existed, that had on 5 podcast episodes, and that's what introduced me to the medium. I got really into that podcast series. It was by a guy called Paul Boag and his partner Marcus Lillington, and they ran a web design agency. And they talked on the podcast every single week about the trials and tribulations of running that agency, teaching the skills, talking about their experience, and having a great time all through it as well. So they entertained you at the same time because they were good friends, a bit of banter going back and forth. So it was a great one to listen to. That persuaded me, or inspired me, into creating a couple of little enterprises of my own, one of which was the Mountain Bikes Apart website, because mountain biking is one of my passions outside of work. And over the years that followed that, 2 or 3 years, I built that website into a business that earned a living through a few different ways. I listened to the Smart Passive Income podcast, which taught me about affiliate income. I listened to the Internet Business Mastery podcast, which taught me about creating digital products. And after all of this, after listening to all these shows, I thought, well, maybe I should create a podcast to promote what I'm doing. So that was the next stage. I started listening to shows which were about how to create a podcast, podcasts about podcasting. I also listened to a lot about presentation skills, so how to get better at this kind of stuff. Michael Port, Steal the Show, is a really good example of that. And along the way, I started the podcast host, so that's the business I run these days. But it started out just as a website which was designed to let me write about what I was learning about podcasting, how I was using it to grow my business, how I was creating good podcasts, engaging podcasts, that sort of stuff. So between then and now, the last 5 years, I've been listening to more and more shows that have helped me grow the business bigger. For example, This Week in Startups is a great one I listened to recently about attracting investment for a company, or Superfast Business taught me how to run a team. So even up to now, I'm still listening to shows which teach me something every single day. Now, why are podcasts so powerful? Podcasts are powerful for a few different reasons. The first of which is time. Now, you can get this stuff from a book, from a magazine, from a video, but you have to make time for those mediums. Podcasting's different. You can consume audio on the go. You can be walking down the street, you can be driving in your car, you can be mowing the lawn, you can be cooking your dinner. You can take in all this material without taking up extra time in your life. It's also engaging. So the power of voice is really apparent when you listen to a podcast, because you get to know the person. You really get to trust them, and that's what takes it towards that personal level. You really get to know that person, and because it's quite personal, because you know them, you're much more likely to take action on the stuff that they're telling you, and you're much more likely to take in all of the material that they're teaching you. So it's just something that is really leads you towards actually taking action, being successful with the stuff that you learn. Now, what can podcasting do? I've alluded to a few of them already. So entertainment, I mentioned that the Boag World podcast was a really entertaining show to start with, but there's lots of other entertaining shows out there as well. For example, I was in the dentist surgery the other day waiting for my appointment, and I was listening to an audio drama which I've been really hooked on called Linetown. It's all about a village that disappeared about 10 years ago, and they were investigating why. But that's one reason that podcasting works for me, because it makes me happier. I'm less bored and frustrated waiting in queues, waiting for things to happen. I can actually have something to take up that wasted time in my life. Podcasting is also educational, obviously. I've talked about the education around work, but I've been educated in all sorts of other ways as well. I mentioned being healthier. So one of my favourite shows around those lines is by a guy called Sean Stevenson. And he talks about nutrition, about well-being, about exercise. And I've changed a lot of stuff in my life based on that show alone, how to sleep better, how to eat better, all that kind of stuff. And that's made a huge difference to me as well. Finally, that inspires, but there's lots of other inspiring shows as well. One of my favourite just now is by a guy called Tim Ferriss, who interviews really high-level people around the world and figures out what makes them tick. And he recently interviewed Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people. And I was really inspired by that show because it showed actually how hard and how smart he has worked to get to where he is just now. It didn't just fall in his lap. He's actually really worked for that. Now, what can you do? I've talked about listening, so I'm just going to give a couple of examples of how podcasting can actually change your life as a producer, just in case you're inspired to go beyond the listening level and create your own shows. So there's a lady that I've worked with recently called Julie Christie, who runs a photography business. She was quite a traditional photography business originally, just taking pictures, just doing it as you do. But recently last year, she released a podcast because she kind of saw that her business wasn't that scalable. She's grown a really big audience around that podcast, a really loyal audience, and now she's really diversified the way that she makes money because she sells digital products, she sells courses, she sells ebooks, things like that. And she's really changed the way that she runs her business through creating that wider audience outside of a local area. Another example at the other end of the scale is a guy called Mark Maron. So he's a comedian. 6 years ago, he was a failed comedian. He'd had trouble with drink, drugs. He was actually getting to the stage where he was contemplating suicide in his basement because his career had just gone completely down the tubes. But instead of doing that, he started a podcast of all things. He just did it as an outlet for the troubles that he'd had, his experience, and he wanted to talk about it, and he wanted to talk to other people in the industry about their troubles as well. 6 years later, because of the honesty, the transparency that comes through that show, it's one of the most popular shows on the internet. You can find it if you just search for Mark Maron. And funnily enough, 3 months ago, he actually interviewed Barack Obama in that same basement because even people like the President of the United States sees the power of how you can engage with the public through podcasting. So what I want to encourage you to do is to get out there and find a show around something that interests you. Think about something, just a fun hobby or something that entertains you, or even something about work if that moves you. But if there's one thing you do after this, just go out there and find something and see if it'll inspire you, educate you, or entertain you. And if you're stuck for ideas, then you can pop along to this URL and you'll see my suggestions. These are 5 of my favourite shows on the internet, and you can have a look at them and let me know what you think. Thanks very much for listening.